having the space for artists to work and let their creativity flow is a big issue. And this is what we're going to be addressing in our next panel discussion. I'd like to welcome to the stage one of the UK's leading authorities on creative urban regeneration. I'll give you Nick Ewbank with the panelists.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. And most of you, I guess, were here for the morning session. Is that correct? I'm seeing nods. We're not huge numbers, so what I thought would be nice would be to try and make this session as interactive as we can and to hear a lot from you on, from the floor, as it were. But before we do that, I'll just introduce the panel, and each of the members of the panel will say a few words about, well, in fact, a little bit more than a few words, I suspect, about their particular perspective on the theme for this session, which is making space. So we've heard a lot about, in the morning, about the kind of economic and structural background to the concept of a creative city and the places where we make creativity. And now it's time to sort of drill down, I think, to the spaces themselves and the context in which those spaces can exist and thrive. So first up is Rebecca Ross, if that's okay. Rebecca is design course leader at Central St. Martin's and also creator of London is Changing, which she's going to tell you all about.
So could we have the slides, please? Maybe just go straight to the second slide. Okay, so thanks to Guy for inviting me today to join this panel, and also thanks to Nick for moderating. We can go to the next slide. Is this, yeah. No, great. Okay. Is this, okay. So I'm studio trained as a graphic designer and an interaction designer. But I also did my PhD in the history and theory of architecture and urbanism. I currently run the MA in the graphic communication design program at Central St. Martin's. My work is concerned with how images, media, and data interact with urban change. I'm especially interested in the relationship between mass media, different kinds of expertise, whether it be professional, creative, or academic, and the scope, positioning, and quality of public engagement in city planning. So for the purposes, oh, can we go to the next slide, actually? Sorry. For the purposes of this panel, I'm less of an expert on how art and design practice in particular transforms and is transformed by urban economies. Rather, I'm an example of a designer and an academic who devises and writes about historic and contemporary ways that people more broadly, including artists and designers and everyone else, engage with urban change through mass media. So as an example of this, I'm going to talk through one of my projects today. As Nick mentioned, London is Changing. And I'll step through the project and then make a few points that I think, and raise a few questions that I think connect it explicitly to the issues that are being aired by this panel. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, perfect, thanks. So this is a computer-generated image of the new Tottenham Hotspur Stadium that circulated fairly widely in local London news. High-resolution renders such as this present what is commonly understood as a pre-photograph of a proposed place. Such images, on one hand, do a great job of attracting institutional allies, supporters, and investors to an architectural or development project. They get displayed on hoarding, they travel around the internet easily, and present an alluringly cinematic glimpse of a potential future. However, because of our tendency to understand them as photographs, they often do so in a way that suggests that the deals have all been done and the project is definitely happening. All that's needed from us is to stay put in our chairs and watch the rest of the film unfold. And Tottenham is an important case in point for London. Much of its future is actually still up for grabs. Argent, the developers responsible for King's Cross, are in negotiation with Haringey about a potential public-private partnership. As The Guardian's Rowan Moore puts it, the old Tottenham of making things and running small shops has had to make way for the new Tottenham packaged for external investors. So there's a lot more nuance to these kinds of conflicts than it being down to a simple case of big developer versus small business, artists, locals, community groups. But a key discussion is whether decision-making about the future of a neighborhood, even one whose own residents acknowledge could greatly benefit from a range of improvements, should be driven more by the potential to attract external investors than the needs and ambitions of communities, including its creatives. The problem that I'm interested in, though, is that this discussion, along with a myriad of related discussions, is not actually taking place in public, and images such as this don't necessarily help. Could we go to the next slide, please? Right, so during 2014, I attended a series of public briefings at the GLA regarding the FALP, or the further alterations to the London Plan. I became engaged with the FALP not only to get a sense of what the changes were about, but also to consider the design of the consultation process. Can we go to the next slide? So the proposed alterations were presented as a 350-page PDF. The base layer of this text was the previous 2011 plan. Proposed amendments were included in blue and deletions with a blue strike through. A policy expert reading the broader document would be able to abstract the key themes with which the changes were concerned in the aggregate. For example, the changing role of the private sector in the provision of social housing and the changing definition of social housing. Can I go to the next slide, please? And in this spread, a shift away from an emphasis on green open space and toward a concept of green infrastructure. However, it would be fairly difficult for a member of the public, or even, for example, a journalist without relevant expert knowledge to understand the implications of the proposals, let alone engage with them. This may be why the FALP, which involved a number of substantial policy shifts that have broad and substantive repercussions, barely registered in the media. Nobody knew about it. Can we go to the next one? So public comment was invited by post or email with explicit reference to the relevant altered policy, text, table, map, or figure, and from what I understand, were disregarded without a sufficient evidence base. So can we go to the next one? I also attended a few different community group meetings and noted that groups such as Just Space and its constituent members, voluntary and community sector organizations, were making a laudable effort to understand and engage with the FALP by partnering with university-based experts, mainly economists, geographers, and planning scholars, who could help them interpret and formulate a response to the proposed changes. I felt aligned with the impulse, but was far more concerned with the necessity to keep up as a prerequisite to what is supposed to be public engagement. I wanted to know if it was possible to have a more community-facing conversation about urban change with an entire city with some degree of nuance, integrity, and transparency. Great, thanks. So as a way of starting to explore this, in January 2015, myself and my assistant Duarte Carrillo de Grassa set up a website targeted at people who are moving into, out of, and around Greater London at londonischanging.org. So we asked a series of short answer and open text questions, which included where participants are moving to, where they're moving from, and most importantly, why and how they feel about it. In the first month, we got a few hundred replies. Okay, yeah. So using this data, we set up a dynamic feed with short excerpts from the testimony we had collected up to that point. We set it up so we could add data continuously as more responses came in. The next phase of the project was during late February and early March, when we had 2 weeks of airtime booked on 2 large-scale digital billboards in central London, one in Holborn and one at Aldgate, via an arrangement between my university and an outdoor media company, which included an exchange of consulting time for airtime. So we configured the 2 billboards to display text from our RSS feed. These kinds of digital billboards have a 60-second cycle, and the way our project worked was that a different piece of testimony would appear for 15 seconds each minute. So when we first launched, our ad was sandwiched between the Cadbury's ad I just showed you and, oh wait, can we go, yeah, and the UK is great for business campaign. Okay, the next week. Okay, so the testimony that was contributed addressed a wide range of themes. So these included, can we go to the next one? First and foremost, affordability. An information security consultant planning to relocate from Hackney to Cambridgeshire said, "I can't afford to stay in the city I was born in." A warehouse operative planning to relocate from Greenwich to Kent said, "I work 50 hours a week plus overtime and can't afford to have my gas on. I want more than anything for my children to be raised in this city." A graphic designer who was planning to relocate from Suffolk to the north said, "Having graduated nearly 3 years ago, I am still living most of the month in my overdraft after paying rent, travel, and bills." Can we go to the next one, please? So An architect planning a move from Camden to Scotland said, "London is too expensive. I can't afford to live without sharing a small flat with too many people or living too far out with an unbearable commute." A screenwriter who recently moved from France to Hackney contributed, "I can't live this kind of hand-to-mouth lifestyle forever." However, another contributor commented, "I recently moved back to London to find more work and opportunities within my field." Similarly, a product manager who recently relocated from the Midlands to Haringey said, "We needed to make the move in order to get our careers back on track." The one on the screen here, "I was sad to move, but there are more opportunities in London than at home," is from a designer who did not particularly want to move to London, but did so from Ireland to be able to advance his or her career. Other contributors wanted to celebrate the diversity of London. A social worker who recently moved from Hammersmith and Fulham to Hillingdon said, "That's where I wanted them to grow up, in a city which was alive and challenging and busy." A probation officer planning to relocate from Waltham Forest to the north contributed, "I bloody love this city. London has shaped me into who I am today. I am loath to leave." Contributors also expressed worries about increasing homogeneity. This is a small printmaking studio planning a move from Suffolk to Lewisham because it is being redeveloped, and their studio is being redeveloped into flats. A teacher who recently relocated from Lewisham to Hackney said, "What will the city do when all the nurses, teachers, and police have left?" Many concerns were expressed along generational lines. A PR consultant who recently relocated from Wandsworth to Wales wrote, "If I was 10 years older, I would have had a head start on the property ladder and would have probably managed to stay here." And a GP planning to relocate from Lewisham to the north commented, "I am desperately sorry for the generation below me who will have even less of an opportunity to live in this amazing city." So over the course of the 2 weeks, can we go to the next one, please? Yes. Over the course of the 2 weeks, as we continued to add billboards to the RSS feed, participants began to respond to one another's testimony, which was extremely gratifying for me in terms of my own goals for the project. The main way that they responded was in questioning the centricity of London, something that just came up in the previous presentation. A postgrad student who recently relocated from Haringey to Sussex wrote, "It's not the city I knew. It doesn't feel like it's for people like me anymore. It's a hell of a lot richer and duller." An events manager planning to relocate from Hammersmith and Fulham to Thailand commented, "London is not the only paradise of opportunity on this earth." And likewise, this software engineer moving from Kingston to the north wrote, "Let's make the rest of the UK interesting and prosperous." So can I go to the next one, please? So in summary, there have been more than 4,000 responses to date, and even though the billboards are no longer up, the images continue to circulate and raise awareness of these issues. This is my favorite one because it provides a summary of my own motivations in many ways. I just hope we will look back at this as a moment of insanity from which we were rescued. This is my SOS. So So the project is my response to socioeconomic changes underway in London, which means that the makeup of the population of the city is in flux. I wanted to put voices of a cross-section of people affected onto the streets at a large scale, normally reserved for one-way corporate communications. And I wanted to give quantitative demographic data that is used in policymaking and planning a more human face. I also was interested in experimenting with dynamic digital billboard technology based on crowdsourced content. More than anything else, I wanted to express a dissatisfaction with how difficult it is for regular Londoners to be aware of changes to city policy, let alone engage with official forums for public feedback, and demonstrate that there is another conversation that is weighing on the city heavily that is not being attended to by planners and politicians in a good enough way. So this is the last slide. So I'll just talk to this one for just a minute. The starting point for today's discussion is to consider the status of creative practice as a component of the lifeblood of this city in the context of deep socioeconomic transformation. As I think I mentioned earlier, I don't see artists and designers as an exceptional category of Londoners in relation to these issues. In fact, in general, I would like to caution this community against lumping all so-called creatives into a distinct or homogenous group with a consistent set of concerns or contributions. You can see here that there's quite a range of perspectives and experiences shared on London is Changing based on all by creatives, people who would be classified as creatives, based on a range of factors. These range from means to age to specific area of practice. So Creative practice features in dialogue about urban change in many ways, as precursor to gentrification, as a casualty of gentrification, as cultural capital waiting to be converted into real capital, as entrepreneurship, as innovation. There are many different experiences, contributions, casualties, and perspectives. At the same time, artists and designers are often pawns in processes of urban change, more often used and subjected than consulted or considered. So what I would like to see is, I would like to see artists and designers who I think are uniquely positioned as communicators, and that's the way that I would distinguish artists and designers. I would like to see artists and designers getting more engaged in the politics of urban transformation, breaking down the opacity, rejecting oversimplistic narratives, rationales, explanations, being more aware of their own privilege and using it more thoughtfully and generously, and being more self-aware about their value and sensitive to the ways that broader institutions and structures use and attempt to use it, celebrating and promoting complexity and multiplicity, exposing and engaging with injustice. So that's how I'll leave it.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I think that was an excellent starting point for the discussion. Perhaps at this point I should just show my hand, because I moved out of Hackney about 20 years ago and now live by the sea in Kent. And part of my work is around trying to encourage people from London to come and discover the joys of places outside, and also contribute to, I was struck by one of those comments where someone said, let's make the rest of the country as prosperous and successful as it might be, and I think that's a really interesting challenge. Let's hear now from Kirsten Dunne. Kirsten is Senior Cultural Strategy Officer at Greater London Authority. Over to you, Kirsten.
Thank you. So sorry about the having to turn around and check my slides. But yes, so there we go, Vivian Westwood. So I think there's going to be a lot of crossover here, I think, with some of the things that you said, and then maybe some slightly different perspectives on some things which I hope we'll get to talk about. So yes, in London, we like to think of ourselves as a place of innovation and experimentation, of entrepreneurial energy and risk-taking. And I think we are good at that, actually. We're good at doing it, and we're good at thinking of ourselves quite positively in that way. And this explains why London is one of the most visited cities in the planet. When people talk about things that they like in London, they inevitably talk about culture. And 4 out of 5 visitors say that they come to London for our culture and heritage. And we know the British Museum has been the most visited museum in the world for the last 3 years running. And of course, there is the enormous economic contribution, which we're not going to dwell on too much in this session, but of the culture and creative industries, which is £35 billion per year. And interestingly, 1 in 6 jobs in London. As an aside, the culture and creative industries are 25% more productive than other industries in the city, actually. So therefore, everything is absolutely hunky-dory and lovely from a cultural perspective, is it not? Next slide, please. So we're not so sure about that. There are things that are going on underneath the surface, and I think actually really not underneath the surface at this point. I think everybody, certainly in this room and the last previous talk, I think everyone's very well aware of them. But I think there are a couple of things to mention about this, which is the context that we're in. London is the biggest it's ever been. It has 8.6 million people, and it will shortly have 10 million people, which of course means enormous pressure on housing and spiraling costs, as we know. Enormous demands on London as a tourist destination, in terms of infrastructure. Enormous demands on the strains on transport, not to mention kind of water supply and energy supply. Next slide, please. And this is a huge demand also on our culture infrastructure. We know that due to development in the city, we've lost 50% of the live music venues in the capital over the last 10, 15 years or so. And London is losing 30% of its artist workspace within the next 4 years, really. And I think, as was beautifully illustrated just now, this means that we are really in danger of losing a huge asset, which is the creative talent that can stay and work and exist in London. And there are various factors contributing to this, and it's not only about housing, actually. There are, the other factors include, for example, visual artists' median wages being £10,000 per year, dancers often less than £5,000 a year. The London living wage is calculated about £18,000 a year, which we all know is also still nonetheless ridiculous. So, and then there are many other factors too, but I think we're here to talk about space, and space is a really important part of this. We need to make sure that we have the space to allow for innovation and the development of new ideas and for experimentation to continue to take place in the city. And I think certainly in our team we're very aware of that. And what we do with space is very important, because for our great innovators in the city, you need to allow space for it to flourish, and you need to allow for people to be inspired by their surroundings and by their communities. And the other context is that other cities around the world are upping their game. London faces huge competition from other cities. New York has invested in a long-term strategic approach that's now seeing kind of a huge growth in visitors to the city. Other cities are finding new and powerful ways to make their cities more vibrant and inclusive and livable. And I think those are some really important words, actually. In Buenos Aires, social circus has transformed crime-ridden areas. In Bogota, is embracing graffiti and the contribution that graffiti is making to the city. Shenzhen are bringing old factories back to life for creativity. Paris, Sydney, and Toronto are all finding ways of keeping creative people in the heart of their cities by using innovative approaches to workspace. Moscow and Montreal are developing ambitious new cultural quarters, which are actually about artists residing in the cities. And Amsterdam and New York are working with artists to advance the rights and integration of immigrant communities. So I think those are some interesting perspectives to bear in mind. Which is why recently, maybe I should explain, within the culture team of the GLA, one of my key roles is to manage the 4th Plinth Commission on Trafalgar Square, which I'll come back to in a minute. But actually more and more, increasingly, my work is about space and planning and value. And this is kind of in response to some of the points that you made, actually. We recently published this guide called The A to Z of Planning and Culture, where we worked with our planning team to look at how planning tools can actually help culture and can help to kind of maintain the vibrance of the city. And it really became clear from looking at this guide, which I brought copies of, by the way, which people can take away with them, that we have to look at the infrastructure that we've got and we have to respect it. And particularly, we have to look at the communities that we have that already exist. And we have to value what people value. And so the importance of, in this picture, you can see Savile Row as a kind of heritage and home of tailoring, but also to informal culture. This is a Stockwell Skate Park, which almost exactly a year ago became an asset of community value, which means that it is slightly more difficult to pave over it and build something on top of it. And other examples within the guide include the Ministry of Sound and the Royal Vauxhall Tavern, as well as the old vinyl factory in Hayes, which is being developed using the site's history in vinyl production to create a whole new kind of area, which is really built on the musical history of the area. And I think what's very interesting about this, about the guide actually, is that there are tools there that are available to people on the ground where they can influence directly what is happening in their neighborhood, what's happening to their local area, what's happening to the things that they love, the buildings that they love, the venues that they love. But actually, what we need to do is help people know about them, which is why we did this guide, because it became very clear that a lot of people don't speak the planning talk, and a lot of the planners don't speak the cultural talk, so there had to be something that kind of came together and brought this to the fore. So I'm sure this is something we'll talk about again. So yes, we have great examples in London, as we know, of innovative approaches to creative workspace. This one, in fact, is Black Horse Lane Studios, which is even funded by the mayor, in fact, for a previous round of funding. And it has kind of kick-started, actually, Waltham Forest to really invest in a whole new kind of development of that area that is looking at the creativity and looking at who's there locally and how they can build on that. So I think that's a real positive thing. But we need to make sure that we have a kind of thriving, I think, cottage industry of creative practice and small-scale manufacturing, which can just as easily be sculptural production. And we need to make sure that those things are still given the space within the city to exist. And that brings me back to the fourth plinth, which is, to me, an extremely special thing, actually, that in a city like London, you can put groundbreaking, provocative sculpture into the center of the most historic square that we have. And it's something I get asked about a lot, actually, from other cities, is how on earth are you doing this? How do you get away with it? And I think it says something. Jeremy Deller talked about the fourth plinth. He said, it's a chance to come up with an idea for the fourth plinth is an invitation to be irresponsible, outrageous, and absurd, sometimes at the same time. And this is something that's really important, and one of the things that I hope that we really hold on to in London, which is the kind of the license to play. So as much as we need formal spaces for creativity to happen, and we need to plan for those, we also need space for the occasional bit of cultural disruption. And that is, to a certain extent, I think what the fourth plinth does, and I think it's something that we really need to kind of stand behind. So, yes, to conclude, we have what we need is, more symbols like the fourth plinth. I think that the importance of having some place for artistic experimentation, for breaking some of the rules, and ensuring that we sustain the creative people in the city that we need to do that for us.
Thank you very much indeed, Kirsten. Fascinating and very stimulating contribution. Now we're turning to Philippine Nguyen, who's one of the co-founders of Unlimited Productions.
Thank you. Do you have my slides? Oh, yes, thank you very much. So hi, everyone. My name is Philippine. So I'm the co-founder of Unlimited Productions. So we are a small arts production company that was founded over a year ago. We're now an international team of 6 people. We're actually based in a creative workspace ourselves, which is called Second Home. Very near from here is off Brick Lane. So I'm really, really familiar of how this type of creative co-working spaces really help foster creativity within startups and small businesses. So our work is at the crossroads of art and urbanism. We try to use the urban environment for creative projects. So I'm not an expert on city planning, but I will try to give you some examples of our own projects and also examples of projects that are very inspiring for us. So why we want to do this type of projects is that because we realize that cities are changing and urban planners and developers are trying more and more to put arts and culture at the center of their placemaking strategies. And at the same time, there is a very high demand for social cultural experiences. So what we're trying to achieve with our projects is to offer artists access to extraordinary spaces that they would really not have thought of before or would not have access to at all. So this enables them to reach out to different type of audiences, especially people who would not always dare to enter the closed space of the museum or the gallery. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you an examples of some of the recent projects that we've been doing. We have been experimenting this on a small scale with urban tiles. The first one, the bank, was so indeed in a bank. So it is just vacant bank in the center of the city of London. It used to be the headquarters of Midland Bank. It has been empty for a few years now. It's a really beautiful Art Deco building that's going to be transformed into a hotel. They used to shot James Bond's Goldfinger there. So we were really lucky to have access to this space for just one night, and we decided to take advantage of this and be able to together in this space do a scripted art trail that unfolded throughout the night in the different spaces of this bank, like the spiral staircase that you have here, a lot of very unusual and amazing spaces with music, dance, performance arts, visual arts, etc. So this is really challenging to be able to present different type of art projects in such spaces for a lot of different reasons. Just having access to the space and also technical, the fact that we only had, it was a construction site at the time, it still is, so it was really hard to deal with all the construction work that was happening there. Next slide, please. And the second edition of Urban Tales was taking place in London's only lighthouse. It's a really beautiful space that is in the Docklands called Trinity Buoy Wharf. It is actually home to a thriving creative community, so if you've never been there, it's really worth a trip. So we partnered with Mahogany Opera Group to stage a site-specific opera inside this lighthouse. Again, it was pretty challenging because there was absolutely nothing there, so no seating, nothing whatsoever. We had to hire everything. We also had to commission design practice to just build sitting that was really made especially for the space. Also, it's in Zone 3, it's in the Docklands, it's not that readily accessible, so to ensure that the audience would dare to go there, we had to have them come by boat from London Bridge. So we were quite happy about this because we had a lot of young people that came because of this and were able to experience an opera for the first time. Next slide, please. So to finish with the examples from the project that we're doing, so I'm going to talk a bit briefly about Art Night. This is our biggest project. This is why our company was established. We've started this over a year and a half ago, so it's going to be the first free all-night contemporary arts festival in London. The first edition is going to be on the 2nd of July 2016. Basically, the idea is to every year explore a different part of London with a cultural institution, a different cultural institution. So this first year, we're starting central to establish the festival. Then we'll move to the East End in 2017 and to South London in 2018. This first edition will be curated by the Institute of Contemporary Arts, and the idea is to take over 10 locations, so a mansion, a church, a garden, a park, a square, from the Mall to Temple, and there present very site-specific, ambitious new commissions of established and emerging artists. So it will be very multidisciplinary with dance, music, architecture, design, performance, and video installations, for example. And again, on a much larger scale, it's very, very challenging to be able to stage such projects and just to have access to extraordinary spaces because it's always complicated to know which are accessible, who are the owners, what is possible to do there. So to give you an example, you have here Admiralty Arch. I'm sure you recognize it. It used to be a government building, has been empty for quite some time. The new owner is a private developer who's going to turn it into a hotel. We've been discussing with him for quite some time to use just one space of this vacant building in a non-disruptive way for just one night, and it has been quite difficult, so we're not sure yet if we're going to be able to use it. The second one that you can see here is the disused Jubilee line that is near Charing Cross. It's a really amazing space that we'll be able to use because we're partnering with Art on the Underground to do a sensory installation there. It's going to be really amazing. So just quickly, I think that to be able to explore extraordinary spaces in the city for creative projects, it's really important to think of different type of collaborations and to find the right partners to do so. Next slide, please. So now I wanted to switch from presenting my own projects to talking about some examples that I think are quite inspiring. So the first one is called Reinventing Paris. So it's from my hometown of Paris. that I really like this idea. I think it's really interesting. So in 2014, the city of Paris decided to do an inventory to figure out what spaces were disused or underused. And usually what they do is they will just auction them off to the highest bidder, but this time they decided to do something a bit different. So they put together an online platform for an open call for the most innovative urban projects there. So basically the spaces that were available were former factory stations, industrial sites, historical buildings, even a former court. They received around 300 different applications, and they have shortlisted a few. The final response will be in January 2016, so they will be able to choose the projects that will be able to reinvent those sites. Amongst those, there is, for example, things as simple as a dance venue or a cinema, or there were things as well, a lot of creative workspaces, an urban farm, also a food incubator, and a lot of different things like this. So I think this is really interesting to be able to have open calls, to really have a lot of different type of organizations to being able to pitch in and decide what's going to happen next to some spaces in their cities. Next slide, please. My last example, so it's another open call, actually, that I really like. That is a London open call, London competition that was also done in Berlin. So it has been initiated by LSE as well as Teatro Mundi. They are a network of urbanists and artists who do a lot of inspiring things. So it's called Designing the Urban Common, and so it is a competition for spaces to be reimagined as common spaces. So basically it was more an ideas competition that resulted in an exhibition. So basically the idea behind was that the city itself should be treated as a common, meaning that a collective and physical creation by and for its inhabitants. So they received a lot of different applications, all very inspiring. Just to give you an example, for example, Shuffle Festival that is in this borough quite near, they partnered with the Friends of Tower Hamlets Cemetery to reinvent the lodge that was the cemetery lodge that was disused for some time, and now they will be with other local groups transforming it into a cultural space with a cafe and some event space. So that's just one of the projects that were submitted through this competition. Just as a conclusion, I would just want to say that all these type of like open calls are really a great way to let a very wide range of organizations and talents to express themselves and take an active part in shaping their cities.
Okay, well, great. Thank you, Philippine, and thanks to all the speakers for those presentations. I think just one thing I'd like to say before opening it up to you and inviting contributions to the floor. In terms of the wider context, I think we are in interesting times at the moment. Much to many people's surprise, when the spending review came round, as you might know, 25 to 40% cuts had been predicted for the arts sector, and the Chancellor decided to ring fence, in the end, arts funding to the Arts Council. Now, in doing so, he said that the arts or the creative sector contributes 250 billion pounds to the UK economy in return for an overall investment of public subsidy of about £1 billion. So an extraordinary return. Not quite sure where he got his figures, but fascinating that the Chancellor should justify and express the argument in that way. And secondly, the government is currently, as you're probably aware, running a consultation on a white paper for the arts for the first time in 50 years since Jenny Lee's groundbreaking paper and policy for the arts. That's out for consultation at the moment, and there are 4 main strands that people are being asked to respond to and feed in their views to. The one I would just single out is the the way that cultural activities bring people together are said to be this is from the government's own DCMS consultation paper, from cultural activities which bring people together to the vital role our unique venues play across the UK, culture sits at the heart of what shapes communities and places. It creates jobs, leads regeneration, and drives new development across, around the country. And they want you to discuss how culture can play a leading role in creating places across the UK where people want to live, work, and visit. So I'll just throw that in there as part of the context for our discussion as I think we may move forward. So over to you a little bit now, I think. Can we just start with a sort of, get a better sense of who you are? You know who we are to a little extent. How many of you would you say, could you put your hand up if you define yourself as an artist or a practitioner? So getting on for half, I'd say. And how many of you would you say use creative workspace? Put your hand up if you use creative workspace in some kind of way. Okay. So again, maybe a third. And how many define themselves as entrepreneurs, bearing in mind our conversation this morning? Okay. All right. Thank you. Right. Let's open it up. Who would like to fire away with some questions or comments? Do we have a microphone? Yeah, great, over there. Please put your hands up if you've got a comment or a question for the panel. Yes, over here. Oh, we've lost our technician. Oh, he's back. That was unfortunate timing. Okay.
Right, I think I'm on now. Yeah, I don't know if many of you are aware, the Centre for London has done a survey on intermediary housing, and it was a wonderful, if any of you were there. There was Tory politicians and Haringey, very, very left-wing politicians, deciding the need between them. So there is a consensus, and it's not just within the creative sector, it's actually more to do with key workers. And the point that was raised this morning when I raised the question about housing, because I think it's integral to the buzz and the excitement of living in London for artists to be able to live here. I mean, I'm a web developer in film festival production, so I wouldn't qualify for something that would be available to me via Beaux Arts, for example, who is a wonderful institution that revamp council estates and what have you. I think that there should be scope for more than the visual arts, but desk-bound jobs as well, and jobs that involve administration, legal advice, also all manner, because it covers, there's a massive arc in the arts perspective, in the arts spectrum, which is not just about creating visual arts, it's the backstory as well.
Okay. Anyone like to come back?
Yeah, just as a matter of interest, I totally agree with that. I think whenever we, and certainly in our team, we use the word artist, we tend to be extremely broad in our definition of that. But for example, there is something in development which is a collaboration between a workspace provider and a housing association, which I think will be in Fish Island, and it's looking at whether you can tether affordable housing provision through the housing association to affordable workspace, and by that I mean kind of creative workspace very broadly across the whole spectrum. So it'll be desk space as well as studios as well. So I think I think that's a really interesting thing. I gather also that in fact is a government kind of sponsored initiative. So I think it is an area of interest that you know, it'll be one tiny project and we need many of those. But it's you know, it's a kind of an interesting development, I think.
It's interesting that Acme Studios, quite a while ago, I think late 70s, started buying up property. Not in a big way, but they sort of had the vision to acquire property freehold. So they weren't in the position of many studio providers of finding cheap leases that they could then sublet out to artists. I wonder if we're sort of past that point where property acquisition might be an option.
I was just going to quickly add to that actually key worker is something, the term key worker was something that was more operational under the Labor government than it's been operational for a while. So in a way, the rhetoric inside your question is something that I think we should be unpacking more, because there is really no special provision made for key workers right now. There is an income category. They have I think it's below 67,000 household income in London and below 60,000 outside of London for certain kinds of housing that are defined as affordable but not social housing, and that affordability term is obviously also one worth unpacking. But I think it's interesting because I think that key worker word is in our culture, and I did mention, of course, like nurses, teachers, EMTs, social workers, those are what traditionally were key workers. But there's really nothing much going on today that's especially targeted at providing for key workers. So the idea of expanding a key worker provision to accommodate artists is almost like there is no key worker provision that's explicitly for key workers. So I don't know what that would be expanding upon. That's the thing. That's what's so interesting. I think that's a little bit of what I'm trying to get at. The rhetoric and the on the ground situation are really the kind of I would say the kind of culture of how we talk about housing and the culture of how we kind of the tools we think we have as a public to have debates about housing are behind the tools that are actually like being the pieces that are being moved around by policymakers, and to the point that we don't even understand that key worker housing actually disappeared a few years back.
In fact, I think I read in the paper today that affordable housing is defined as below 450,000, which isn't everybody's definition of affordable, obviously.
Yeah, and that actually was probably set up in the last administration. Like those are hangovers from an old program.
Susan.
I'm always interested in the data of things like, you know, the British Museum is the biggest visitor numbers in the world. The last list I looked at, galleries, showed that, of course, yes, the Tate had amazing figures, but look at the Louvre, and it charges, you know? So I find myself thinking that, I remember on my hotel receipt once when I was in London, it said, don't forget all the galleries and museums in London are free, so that all the tourists knew that. But they all actually expect to pay. So is it totally unimaginable to say that there could be some kind of tithe on the success that London has to make sure that artists aren't marginalised as part of the community? If artists are the lifeblood of creativity, it's no good wringing our hands about it and saying, oh, we haven't really got an answer. You know, we can put a little bit of this here and a little bit of that there. I think it needs some radical solutions, and I think where London is successful and will continue to be successful, selling very expensive properties to international investors, you know, there should be a way in which that the creators, the creative people can benefit from that kind of income that other cities don't enjoy. And even with a city like Glasgow, which equally is popular, has a very different kind of economic base to it.
Yeah, I think there are actually quite a lot of things to say about that. But one of them is, I think that certainly I've heard an idea being bandied around, which would be something like a tourism tax, so that, you know, which several other cities do in fact use, you know, that if you had a tiny percentage on each hotel stay, and if that could be a cultural fund, you know, fantastic, sign me up, you know, that would be absolutely brilliant. And whether that would be a culture fund is a completely other story, because there's a whole infrastructural issue and so on. So there is that. I mean, the reason I mentioned what the income is of artists, and I was talking about visual artists and dancers, is because I think there's a point worth making here, which is, yeah, on the one hand, we have big bad development and we have various things kind of going on. On the other hand, we have a sector which is just continuously underselling itself in some form that is just not making itself felt properly. And I don't really know what the answer to this is, but I do know that if you talk about Edinburgh Festival, for example, all the hotels, when the Edinburgh Festival is on, they put up their prices by 200% or whatever it is. Everybody makes money, and yet all the touring companies who go there are still not sure they're going to be able to pay their staff, because they're not sure, they're not getting a particular fee from the venues. They're getting some percentage of ticket sales, which may or may not materialize. Now, and then this question of artists earning £10,000 a year. Maybe people aren't being paid for exhibitions at institutions or touring exhibitions, so on. So there's a slightly, to me, there is a kind of an endemic failure that's going on here a little bit, that is perpetuated within the art sector itself, as well as then outside the art sector, which I do think is kind of worth mentioning, or worth kind of drawing attention to. I do think the other thing is that we're here talking about space, I think, about kind of creative space and about urban development. And I think there are these differences between, on the one hand, there are the responsibilities, say, of a sector or of an audience, and then there are responsibilities of, say, the people who are building the city, the public sector and so on, who still need to make sure that culture is integral to, and creativity is integral to everyday life. So there are these kind of two slightly different areas, I think, in a way.
So what kind of things can the London authorities do about these?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. And on the subject, say, of income, for example, I kind of don't know the answer to that. But I do think on the question of space, there is something that can absolutely be done. That is, I gave the example of Black Horse Lane workshop, which is about looking at what the resources within the community. So looking at, okay, who are the entrepreneurs who are working here? What do they need? Can we provide this? Are we listening to our local cohorts? And it does have to happen kind of on that local level. And I think it is also really about valuing. The Vauxhall Tavern has been around for so many years. It has an audience. You have to value that, and it has to make itself felt. Those kind of things, which are really quite localized in a sense. Although I do think there's probably, we have, for example, at the GLA, we have the Arts and Culture Forum, which brings together anybody who's working in arts and culture across all of the boroughs in London, and we meet kind of 3 times a year or so to discuss some of the kind of thorny issues. So what that does is bring all these people together in one place, which they very often are unable to do, and kind of just talk about what the issues are, get examples of good stuff that other people are doing, and kind of quite practical things. But I do think there does need to be some stuff with some teeth, and I think people need to, I think local authorities too, I think people need to realize that there is some power there, and there are decisions that can be made, and it's not all out of everybody's hands,
So would any of the artists practitioners in the room, on the question of income, or on indeed the question of housing or working space, are there any contributions that anyone would like to make? Susan, I know you said to me earlier in the break, you mentioned something about flexible workspace needs were changing in terms of artists' requirements.
Yes, at a risk of hogging the microphone, I'm sure somebody else can say it equally well. I'm of the opinion that the notions of workspace and creative space need to be more broadly defined. Unless there is more than £10,000 median income per year, and thinking about the overhead costs of living in large conurbations, the affordability of a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day space neither suits people's economic circumstances or necessarily the way that they practice. When I was running AN, the Artists Information Company, in 2006, we did a survey which looked at future space. And even then, artists were talking about needing different kind of space. I'm not just talking about good digital facilities. I'm talking about that very different kind of flexibility that links with childcare, that links with care for older people, which links with different kind of work and economic lifestyles. So I think that may have a handle on it that perhaps is rather different than permanent space, that perhaps competes with the large bucks of property development.
Any of the panel like to comment on that?
I don't know that I have. I think maybe one of the things that we're circling around, or maybe I feel like we're sort of circling around, is there's something about when we have lots of small interventions and lots of small kind of I think we used the terms before, playgrounds. We've used the term placemaking. Those are terms we hear again and again, and I think we have the word value coming up, and I think maybe sort of thinking about kind of how value is held up or moved along by these kinds of small things is a question, as opposed to structural level programs. I think that's a little bit of what you're saying. So, and I guess what Kirsten was talking about before, that maybe the sector, and I said it as well, I said we need to do a better job of valuing what we do, and understanding how the value of what we do is used. But I guess I am thinking a little bit about who even benefits, I think we all in this room acknowledge that the arts and design bring a lot of value, create value. We're a cultural capital engine, right? So the question is, though, as a cultural capital engine, what structures can be put in place? Can structures be put in place that allow what's generated by that engine to benefit people more evenly than they're currently being benefited? How that relates to the specific question, the specific comment you raised about, I guess I kind of, I really worry when I hear about my homeless, I run an MA course, I really worry when I hear about my homeless students, students living in libraries, students who get their bedroom for 8 hours a day, and someone else gets their bedroom for the other 8 hours of the day. Like literally, like there are 3 people sharing, they get shifts in their bedrooms in shared houses. This is definitely happening right now. People living in sheds, people living on rafts. So when we talk about these kind of super flexible situations, I guess I get worried about whether that's pushing people too far into a situation where they're being exploited by this broader system. And so on one hand, yes, of course, artists and designers tend to be really tactical, and they're practical, and what can they make that works out of what's immediately around them. But then at some point we have to ask questions about how the broader systems are serving different kinds of people well enough, and kind of where the value is landing at the end of the day.
Anyone else?
Well, I think I would say that, I totally agree with you, actually. And I think, and there are others, I was saying a bit earlier, there are other cities that are absolutely looking at that. For example, Amsterdam's a great example. Obviously, I always start, whenever anyone talks to me about other cities, I always say, oh, what's the population of that city?
And they're shrinking, not growing.
Exactly. And they are always obviously some tiny fragment of what London's population is. So these things are not completely comparable. However, and the pressures are slightly different, I think. But there is a thing about an endemic, and it kind of valuing something systematically. And Amsterdam as a city has decided that they will invest in particular artists. Every year they will choose a certain number of artists across different spheres. They are chosen by institutions within the city, and those artists are given a place to live, a place to work, and some kind of bursary. And the whole purpose of this is to make sure that those creative people stay in the city. And that is it's a small number of people. It's not comparable with London, but it is a systematic choice to do that, and I think is something very interesting. And that is also, we see that also in other cities. I suppose a more comparable city might be San Francisco, where they have established a trust, which is kind of buying back, or it's enabling, it's buying back buildings for cultural use, so that those cultural organizations can then begin to own those buildings again over a period of time once they've inhabited them. So I think it's very interesting to see that other cities have recognized this problem in the city, and that they're making these kind of quite systematic investments, I suppose.
Yeah. Anyone else from the floor like to come back, comment, or ask any more questions? Yes? Just time for one more, I think.
It's interesting to hear, if I look at myself or what you're asking really from personal and from working, how much I am in survival mode, and I think maybe we all are. The way I work a lot with, I produce theatre and short film productions, and I work with a lot of festivals who use unused or historical buildings, so then you create performances there, or that way I also got my office, and I live in a derelict building that we have to do up ourselves, so the roof is leaking, but I have a space, and it's quite a big space, so I'm happy with that. But then hearing about it, you realize it is so in survival mode. It's so far down the line that I'm already happy with that, and I am happy, and I'm grateful that I can be in zone, sort of, all right. And I kind of, from a romantic, artistic point of view, maybe I want to feel that I become more creative by it, but actually maybe it's also a little bit tiresome, and it's sad, and especially hearing also about students, it's worrying. Yes, it is creative, it's opening up creative possibilities, and I feel I want to live in this city because it toughens you up or something, or you feel like, well, I'm doing it in London, and I grew up in the Netherlands, and sometimes I think, what the hell am I doing here? But then you see the people who you're doing it with, and for some reason we want to stay, I think, or, well, you showed different...
Well, it's a question of where people are drawing that line. One of the billboards that I didn't show is, I can't afford to romanticize the exploitation anymore. But yeah.
Yeah, no, it's good to realize how far down the line we are, maybe, I don't know, and hopefully there's, I don't know if there's a way out. There's a way to create, always, definitely. But.
Well, yes, of course. Do you want to just take the mic for a second? 2 mics.
Hello. Does the institution, Central St. Martin's, help the shift livers? The shift sleepers?
I don't think that they know about it that much. I know about it because of I have a student-facing role. I certainly pass along my knowledge of what's going on the ground upwards, and they are working to reduce the price of halls very, very actively. And I think a lot of what happened over the past few years is that the price of halls sort of skyrocketed because halls don't pay council tax. It was like the only good real estate investment immediately following the economic crash were halls, and so they're trying to rein that in and bring that back down. But it's just not fast enough. But you're right. It's something that institutions have to engage with, as well as if they want to sustain themselves and have students.
Okay, I think the clock has ticked away. I'll just to wind up, I'll just mention again, I think Kirsten very clearly made the case for a kind of systematic approach to addressing some of these problems. Maybe it's optimistic to say we might solve them, but at least to address some of them. And just to remind you again that this is a kind of once in a generation thing that the government is doing at the moment by holding a consultation on a white paper on culture. And it might be a damp squib and a missed opportunity. It might be that it's a transformational thing, but either way, you've got 2 choices, really. You can hope that this process will lead to something that helps move us forward, or you can feed your views in and maybe contribute to a better outcome. So there's a public consultation at the moment. This question that I mentioned about how government policy might support the better making of spaces that artists can flourish in has about 20 contributions on the website at the moment, which I don't think is all that great. If everyone in this room felt they wanted to contribute, that would double the amount of response. Can we tweet out the consultation? Thank you, guys. It's available online. It's on the DCMS's website, and it's called the Places Challenge. and anyone can go on. I think you might have to register, but you can make your views known. Okay, that's it from us. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the session. Good day. Thank you.